I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who really, really loves his dog and has an incredibly low tolerance for stupidity. It's a dangerous combination. It's how you find yourself on a Tuesday morning with a Category 3 hurricane churning off the coast, on your hands and knees in your own driveway, arguing with your golden retriever about the geometric properties of a recycling bin. No, it's not a chew toy, Barnaby, I grunted, swatting his wet nose away from the plastic edge for the 5th time. And for the love of all that is holy, stop trying to lick the ruler. He responded with a deep, soulful thump, thump, thump of his tail against the pristine, HOA-approved concrete. He thought we were playing a new and fascinating game called Daddy Shouts at the Garbage. The source of my humiliation was a crisp piece of cream-colored cardstock, currently tucked into the waistband of my shorts. It was an official violation notice from the Paradise Palms Homeowners Association. My crime? The notice, in its severe, laser-printed font, informed me that my recycling bin had been observed at a non-compliant 4 1/4 inches from the designated curbside placement zone. 4 1/4 inches. The fine was $25. I adjusted the bin, nudging it precisely 6 inches from the curb as stipulated in the 300-page Book of Covenants I was pretty sure no one but God and our HOA president had ever actually read. Barnaby let out a hopeful bark, as if to say, "Did we win the game, Dad?" "We all lose this game, buddy," I muttered, straightening up and dusting off my knees. That's when I saw her. Across the street, gliding along the sidewalk with the predatory grace of a leopard spotting a weak gazelle, was Brenda. Brenda was our HOA president. She was a woman in her late 50s, perpetually clad in linen pants and a polo shirt the color of weak tea. She carried a clipboard like a royal scepter and wielded it with the absolute authority of a demigod ruling over a tiny beige kingdom. Brenda's hair was sculpted into a blonde helmet that could likely withstand a direct meteor impact, and her face was locked in a permanent expression of mild disappointment, as if the entire world was a poorly managed restaurant she was perpetually on the verge of writing a scathing Yelp review for. She was, in short, a Karen of such purity and power that she probably vibrated at a frequency only dogs and other Karens could hear. Her laser gaze swept over Mrs. Gable's prize-winning petunias, lingered menacingly on the Henderson kid's bicycle that was leaning against his garage door instead of being secured within it. And then it landed on me. A thin, triumphant smile curled her lips. She changed course, her sensible walking shoes making no sound on the pavement as she advanced on my position. She was a walking, talking embodiment of the phrase, "I'd like to speak to the manager." The problem was, in Paradise Palms, she was the manager. "Good morning, Alex," she chirped, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. "Getting everything in order?" I gave her my best, most meaningless smile. "Just complying, Brenda. Wouldn't want the fabric of society to unravel over a misplaced recycling bin. It would be anarchy." The sarcasm sailed so far over her helmet hair, it might as well have been in orbit. "Excellent," she said, making a check mark on a sheet on her clipboard. "Order is what separates us from the animals." She flicked a contemptuous glance at Barnaby, who had chosen this exact moment to plop his backside onto the grass and begin gnawing enthusiastically on his own leg. "Speaking of which," Brenda continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I've logged Barnaby's bark duration twice this week. He had a 4-minute session at 7:15 a.m. on Monday and a 7-minute outburst around noon yesterday. We're approaching the 15-minute cumulative daily limit." She tapped her clipboard meaningfully. "Just a friendly reminder." Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't get me fined into the next century, she pivoted and glided away, off to terrorize someone else over the unauthorized hue of their welcome mat. I sighed, looking down at my dog. 15 minutes, buddy. You hear that? You've got about 3.5 minutes of barking left for the rest of the day. Use them wisely. Barnaby stopped chewing on his leg and looked up at me, head cocked, a strand of drool dangling from his jowl. He then let out a single, loud, "Woof!" "There go 30 seconds, I said, shaking my head as I headed inside. The air conditioning hit me like a wave, a welcome respite from the humid, oppressive Florida air. I flicked on the television for some background noise, and the local news channel flashed onto the screen. A grim-faced meteorologist was standing in front of a swirling, angry vortex of red and yellow. And, upgraded to a Category 1 hurricane just in the last hour, he was saying. We're calling it Hurricane Mortimer. I stopped dead in my tracks. Mortimer. It sounded less like a terrifying force of nature, and more like a stuffy accountant who would definitely be on an HOA board. The map showed a projected path, a cone of uncertainty that seemed to have our stretch of the Gulf Coast dead in its sights. Barnaby, oblivious to the impending doom, trotted in and dropped a slimy, well-loved tennis ball directly onto my foot. His big brown eyes looked up at me, full of hope and blissful ignorance. I reached down and scratched him behind the ears. "Well, buddy," I sighed, a strange sense of foreboding mixing with an even stranger sense of relief. "Looks like things are about to get a lot less boring." By the next morning, Hurricane Mortimer had apparently been hitting the gym. He'd bulked up to a Category 3, and the cone of uncertainty had narrowed into a veritable laser beam pointed at our front door. The official mandatory evacuation order came down at 8 a.m. We had 36 hours to get out. My phone immediately began to buzz like an angry hornet's nest. The Paradise Palms Neighbors group chat, normally a sleepy forum for complaining about palm frond disposal and advertising garage sales, had erupted into a digital panic room. Carol P. "Has everyone seen the news? Mandatory evacuation." Dave, bearded dragon guy. "Yeah, the state shelters won't take reptiles. Anyone know a pet-friendly hotel in Georgia?" Patterson family. "We have 3 dogs and a toddler. We can't fit them all in the Civic. What are we going to do?" The digital terror was palpable. This was the flip side of our manicured paradise. We were on a sliver of land surrounded by water, and when the music stopped, there weren't enough chairs for everyone. Especially not if you had a non-human family member. Just as the chaos reached a crescendo, a new message appeared that cut through the noise. It was from Carol, the retired school principal. She was a woman who could organize a middle school field trip to a war zone and have everyone back in time for lunch with signed permission slips. Carol P. "Okay, everyone, settle down. I have just spoken with the board's treasurer. We are using the Community Emergency Fund to charter 2 pet-friendly evacuation buses. They have climate control and room for crates. They will take residents and their pets to a designated partner shelter in Ocala. The buses will arrive at the main gate tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. sharp." A collective digital sigh of relief swept through the chat. A plan. A sensible, organized plan. It was beautiful. Feeling a surge of my old professional instincts, I chimed in. Back in my previous life, I flew cargo. Big, ugly, Soviet-era Antonovs, the kind of planes that looked like they were assembled from spare tractor parts. I flew them through Arctic storms and desert heat waves, hauling everything from oil rig equipment to medical supplies. My entire job was logistics. Getting things from a place they shouldn't be to a place they needed to be, safely and on time. Compared to landing a 90-ton metal bird on a gravel runway in a blizzard, organizing a few dozen pets felt like a walk in the park. Alex. Me. "Happy to help coordinate the check-in, Carol. I can create a manifest to keep things moving smoothly. Send me the list of who's signed up." For the next few hours, I was back in my element. I drafted a simple manifest on my laptop, assigning families a check-in number. I sent out a blast message with clear instructions. Have pets crated before you arrive. Label your crate clearly with your name and your pet's name. 1 soft-sided carry-on per person. It was order in the face of chaos. It felt good. As I sent the final email with the completed manifest to Carol, I leaned back in my chair. Barnaby was asleep at my feet, his paws twitching as he dreamed of chasing squirrels in a world without leash laws. Everything was set. But a small, nagging feeling pricked at the back of my mind. I scrolled through the entire history of the group chat. Dozens of messages from panicked then relieved residents. Messages from Carol. Messages from me. But there was one person who was conspicuously, deafeningly silent. Brenda. It was too quiet, too easy. In Paradise Palms, nothing good ever came easy. I sent one last message to the group, trying to ignore the knot tightening in my stomach. Alex, me. Manifest is set. See you all at the front gate at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Let's get our furry friends to safety. At 9:55 a.m. the next day, the air at the front gate of Paradise Palms was thick with humidity and anxiety. The sky was a bruised, ugly gray, and the palm trees were already doing a nervous hula dance in the rising wind. A crowd of about 30 of my neighbors stood huddled together, a small, desperate arc of creatures. Mrs. Higgins, a sweet woman in her 80s, clutched a cat carrier to her chest, whispering reassurances to Mittens, her frail Persian. The Patterson family was a whirlwind of chaos, trying to keep their 3 yapping chihuahuas from achieving escape velocity, while their toddler attempted to finger paint the side of a crate with yogurt. Dave, the reptile guy, stood calmly with a high-tech terrarium, inside of which Zeus the bearded dragon looked on with the serene indifference only a lizard can truly master. Then, right on schedule, 2 large, clean charter buses appeared at the end of our street like chariots of the gods. A wave of palpable relief washed over the crowd. This was it. We were getting out. The first bus slowed to a stop at the community's ornate and frankly ridiculous wrought iron gates. The driver, a man with a friendly face and a Teamster's cap, gave us all a reassuring wave. And that's when it happened. Like a villain in a terrible play, Brenda emerged from her perfectly beige house. She wasn't running, she glided, a portrait of grim determination. She walked directly into the center of the road and stood in the path of the bus, holding up a single, imperious hand. She had her clipboard. My blood ran cold. I walked up to her, forcing my voice to stay level. "Brenda, what's going on? We need to get these people loaded up. There's a hurricane coming." She didn't even look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the bus driver, who was now leaning out of his window with a confused look on his face. "I'm sorry," Brenda announced, her voice carrying over the wind. "You can't come in." "Ma'am," the driver said, his friendly demeanor already starting to fray. "This is an official evacuation transport. We've been chartered by your community." "And this," Brenda declared, puffing out her chest, "is a private community with rules." She raised her clipboard as if it were a holy text. "I direct your attention to Bylaw 12, Section B, Paragraph 4. No commercial vehicles exceeding a 2-ton weight limit may operate on Paradise Palms residential streets without a permit submitted and approved 48 hours in advance." A stunned silence fell over the crowd, lasting for about 3 seconds before it was shattered by a collective groan of disbelief. "Are you insane?" Mr. Patterson yelled, juggling a chihuahua. "It's a hurricane!" "These are our pets!" Mrs. Higgins cried out, her voice trembling. Brenda was a rock, an immovable object of pure, unadulterated bureaucracy. "A rule is a rule," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "It is in place to protect the integrity of the asphalt. If I make an exception for you, what's next? 18-wheelers driving through here, construction cranes. An emergency is no excuse for chaos. She looked around at the frantic crowd, the whimpering animals, the darkening sky. In fact, it is when order is most important. I stepped closer, trying to reason with the unreasonable. Brenda, listen to yourself. You're worried about the asphalt? In a few hours, that asphalt might be under 4 feet of water. These are people's families. You should have thought of that, she sniffed, and made alternative arrangements that comply with our community covenants. Someone in the back of the crowd finally did what we were all thinking and screamed, "Just call the cops!" Minutes later, a squad car rolled up, its arrival somehow both official and deeply weary. A veteran police officer named Miller climbed out of the car. He had the kind of face that had seen 1,000 Florida Man stories play out in real time, and he wore a sigh like a second uniform. This, his posture screamed, was his 5th HOA-related dispute this week, and it was only Tuesday. Officer Miller listened patiently, his gaze drifting from my face to the panicked residents, to the stoic bus driver, and finally to Brenda, who stood there looking like Joan of Arc defending the sanctity of pavement. "Ma'am," Miller began, his voice a carefully calibrated tool of de-escalation. "I understand your position. However, there is a mandatory state-level evacuation order in effect. That generally supersedes local ordinances, especially HOA rules." Brenda drew herself up to her full 5'4" height. "Officer, this is private property. Are you telling me that you, an officer of the law, are going to violate the sanctity of our community's established and legally binding covenants? I will need your badge number, and I will be speaking to your supervisor about your failure to enforce private property law." I watched Officer Miller's soul momentarily leave his body. He took a deep breath, the kind you take before explaining to a toddler for the 10th time why they can't have ice cream for breakfast. He turned to me and the bus driver, subtly lowering his voice. "Look," he said, his eyes conveying a universe of frustration. "Technically, she's not breaking a criminal statute. It's a civil issue. She's standing on private road, blocking a commercial vehicle from entering against the wishes of the property's governing body, which is her. I can't physically remove her or force you through without a court order, and we're not getting one of those before Mortimer makes landfall." He was trapped, and so were we. "My hands are tied," he said, the words tasting like ash. "I cannot officially advise you to break the law, but—" He paused, his gaze flicking to Brenda, who was now smugly polishing her glasses, then back to me. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shrug. It was a gesture that said everything he couldn't. It said, "I am a public servant who is legally obligated to turn my back and become intensely interested in the contents of my patrol car's computer for the next 10 minutes. Good luck." With that, he tipped his hat, told Brenda she could be held liable for any harm that came to the animals, to which she just scoffed, and walked back to his car. He parked it 100 yards down the road, the brake lights flashing once before he settled in, pointedly facing away from us. The official channel was closed. The easy solution was gone. The bus drivers, apologetic but on a schedule, couldn't wait any longer. With a final, sad wave, they pulled away from the curb and drove off, leaving us in a cloud of diesel fumes and despair. The hope that had buoyed the crowd just minutes before evaporated. Mrs. Higgins started to cry softly. The Chihuahuas, sensing the shift in mood, began to howl. We were stranded, trapped by the storm on one side and by a tyrannical homeowners association on the other. Defeated, I walked back toward my house, Barnaby trotting beside me, blissfully unaware of the drama. I slumped down in my garage, the open door revealing a street full of my heartbroken neighbors comforting their pets. My phone buzzed. It was a picture in the group chat from Mrs. Higgins. It was a close-up of Mittens, her fluffy face pressed against the bars of her carrier, her big green eyes looking impossibly sad. That was it. That was the gut punch. Annoying Brenda was one thing. Making Mrs. Higgins cry was another. I scrolled absently through the news on my phone, looking for an update on Mortimer's track. My thumb stopped on a small, local interest story buried between storm warnings. The headline read, "Local airfields secure private aircraft. Cease commercial operations." The article mentioned that the small executive airport just 15 minutes down the road was shutting down to the big airlines, but was still technically open for private and emergency flights until the tower closed. My gaze drifted from the phone to a dusty, framed photo on my workbench. It was of a much younger me, grinning like an idiot, standing in front of a monstrously ugly 4-engine cargo plane. An Antonov An-12, a relic from the Soviet Union's most brutalist period of aeronautical design. My crew and I had nicknamed her the Flying Babushka because she was old, loud, stubborn, and smelled faintly of cabbage, but she could carry almost anything and would never, ever die. We flew her all over Alaska, hauling machinery, supplies, even livestock. I once transported 200 live pigs from Anchorage to Nome in that plane. I looked at the picture. I looked at my phone. I looked over at Barnaby, who was now trying to wedge his entire head inside a half-empty bag of potting soil. Pigs, dogs, crates, cargo. The cogs in my brain, rusty from years of quiet retirement, began to grind and turn with an audible, metaphorical clank. Weight and balance calculations, securing the load, filing a flight plan. It was all just logistics. It's the craziest, stupidest, most brilliant idea I've ever had, I said out loud to the empty garage. Barnaby pulled his head out of the bag, his entire muzzle covered in dirt, and sneezed. It was time to make some calls. My home office, usually a sanctuary of quiet contemplation and online bill paying, transformed into a mission control center. My heart was hammering with a mixture of terror and a kind of wild, exhilarating glee I hadn't felt in years. I pulled up my old contacts list, praying the numbers still worked. First call. Ground support. I dialed Gus. The phone rang twice before he picked up, his voice barely audible over the sound of howling wind and what sounded like a nail gun. "Gus?" "Alex! Bad time, buddy," he yelled. "Me and Hurricane Mortimer are in a staring contest over my new patio furniture. I think I'm losing." "Forget the furniture, Gus. I need you and your biggest flatbed truck. Here, at Paradise Palms. In 1 hour." There was a pause. The nail gun went silent. "A flatbed? Now? Are you nuts? My guys are gone, man. They're boarding up their own houses. It's just me." This was the crucial moment. I had to sell the glorious insanity of the plan. "I'll pay you triple the emergency rate, Gus. Cash. And I promise you, the story you get out of this will be worth more than the money. This will be the one you tell your grandkids." I could almost hear him chewing on it. The greed versus the sheer beautiful stupidity of it all. "You son of a bitch, I'm in," he said finally. "What are we moving, gold bars?" "Better," I said, a grin spreading across my face. "Cats, dogs, and at least one bearded dragon." "I'll be there in 50 minutes, he said, and hung up. One down, one to go. My finger hovered over the next number. Maria. She ran the show at the executive airfield. A tough, no-nonsense woman who had seen me land the babushka in crosswinds that would make a bald eagle weep. We had a history of mutual respect built on a shared love of aviation and a tolerance for each other's eccentricities. "Maria," I said when she answered, "please tell me you're still there." "Alex? Blast from the past," she said, her voice as calm and clear as a runway light. "I'm here till the tower officially closes. What's the emergency? Forget your passport on a trip to the grocery store." "Worse. I need a plane, a big one. Tell me the flying babushka hasn't been turned into beer cans yet." Maria let out a throaty laugh that I could hear even over the crackle of the connection. "That old Antonov? Alex, that plane will outlive us all. She's sitting pretty in Hangar 4. Ugly as sin, but the engines were serviced last month. Don't tell me you're thinking of taking her up. You remember how to fly that beast?" "It's like riding a very large, very loud, very angry bicycle," I said. "I never forget. Can you get her fueled? I'm filing a flight plan to Ocala. It's an emergency transport." "An emergency transport of what?" she asked, a note of suspicion in her voice. "Let's just call them high-value, vocal, biological assets." There was a moment of silence on her end. I imagined her looking out her office window at the swaying trees, weighing the regulations against the sheer entertainment value of what I was proposing. "You know what, Alex? For you, and for the story you are definitely going to owe me after this, I'll even waive the landing fee at the other end. Just get your ass here before the crosswinds hit 50 knots. And don't bend my plane." "You got it," I said, my heart soaring. "We're on our way." I hung up the phone, feeling 10 feet tall. The plan was in motion, now to rally the troops. I opened the neighborhood group chat, my fingers flying across the screen. Alex, me. "Plan B is a go, everyone. Have your pets crated and ready. A flatbed truck will be arriving on my street in 1 hour to pick them up. This is not a drill. Trust me." The chat, which had been a river of despair, instantly exploded in a flurry of question marks and confused replies. Carol P. "A flatbed truck? Alex, what are you talking about?" Patterson family. "Where is it taking them?" Dave, bearded dragon guy. "Is this safe for ectotherms?" I typed one final message, putting all the authority of a cargo captain into the simple words. Alex, me. "It's safer than a hurricane. Be ready, no delays." No one questioned me after that. An hour later, my quiet residential street looked like a MASH unit for a zoo. Gus, true to his word, had arrived in a flatbed truck so large it seemed to bend space and time around it. Its diesel engine rumbled with a low, guttural promise of sheer power, a sound that was deeply offensive to the delicate sensibilities of Paradise Palms. He hopped out of the cab, a stout man with a magnificent beard and a grease-stained Gus's Trucking t-shirt. He took one look at the scene, 24 of my neighbors emerging from their homes, clutching pet carriers of every shape and size, and a slow grin spread across his face. "Well, I'll be," he said, shaking his head in admiration. "You were not kidding." I had my clipboard, an old, beat-up one from my flying days, not a pristine weapon of tyranny like Brenda's. I was in my element. This was chaos, yes, but it was my kind of chaos. It was logistics. "All right, people, listen up!" I yelled, my voice cutting through the wind and the cacophony of anxious animal noises. I was Cargo Captain Alex now. "This is a weight and balance issue. Heaviest crates in the center, directly over the axles. I want the feline contingent strapped down on the port side, canines on the starboard. Any avian passengers need to be kept away from the cats for obvious reasons of interspecies diplomacy." The neighbors, desperate for a leader, snapped into action. It was a scene of beautiful, frantic comedy. Mr. Patterson, his face a mask of determination, passed his 3 chihuahuas up to Gus like he was loading ammunition. Mrs. Higgins was fretting that mittens would be too cold, so I had Gus place her carrier next to the warm bulk of a 100-pound Bernese mountain dog. Dave, the reptile guy, calmly asked about the best spot for a low-vibration ride. "Put Zeus near the front, Gus!" I yelled. "He'll be fine!" Barnaby, tied to the oak tree in my front yard, was barking non-stop, a series of encouraging staccato yelps, For once, I didn't care about his 15-minute daily limit. He was a furry, four-legged hype man for our ridiculous operation. We were just securing the last crate with a thick canvas strap when the inevitable happened. Like a bad penny, Brenda appeared. She stormed out of her house, phone held high, already live streaming her outrage to whatever dark corner of the internet she called home. "As you can see," she narrated to her phone, her voice shaking with righteous fury, "this is the complete and utter breakdown of civil order I was warning about. They have brought in heavy industrial machinery, a flagrant violation of multiple covenants. They are turning our beautiful, award-winning lawns into a truck stop." She marched to the end of my driveway and planted herself directly in the path of the flatbed. Her arms were crossed, her chin was jutted out. It was a final, desperate stand for the forces of petty tyranny. "You are not moving this vehicle," she shrieked. "This is a violation of Bylaw 7.4 subsection C, heavy machinery on unapproved surfaces. Not to mention the original commercial vehicle violation. You are finished." This was the moment, the climax. But I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I wasn't going to argue, I wasn't going to yell, I was just going to win. I glanced at my watch. I gave Gus, who was watching me from the cab of the truck, a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then I walked towards Brenda, a serene smile on my face. "Brenda, you're absolutely right," I said, my voice calm and reasonable. "Bylaw 12, Section B is very clear about commercial vehicles on the street." Her face went smug. She had me. "Exactly. So you will unload this monstrosity immediately." "However," I continued, savoring the moment, "this isn't a commercial vehicle. This is my good friend Gus's personal truck. He's registered it for private use, and he's just helping me and a few dozen of our friends move our personal property from one place to another." I gestured to the crowd of neighbors, who were watching with rapt attention. "And we would never dream of driving this large, privately owned vehicle on the street, Brenda. That would be a violation." Confusion clouded her face. But you're blocking the—" Before she could finish, Gus turned the key. The flatbed's massive diesel engine roared to life, a thunderous sound that shook the very foundations of Brenda's well-ordered world. With a skill that bordered on ballet, Gus cranked the wheel sharply to the right. The truck's front tires mounted the curb and bit into the lush, perfectly manicured St. Augustine grass of my next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson, a man who had received 3 separate fines from Brenda for the non-standard height of his sunflowers, gave us a massive, gleeful thumbs up. The giant truck, laden with its precious cargo of yapping, meowing, and squawking creatures, rolled like a juggernaut across his lawn, churning up a beautiful trail of dirt and torn sod. It bypassed the Brenda roadblock entirely, continued onto the lawn of the neighbor on the other side, who was also cheering and filming the whole thing, and then smoothly re-entered the street 100 feet past the gate, clear of Brenda's jurisdiction. The entire maneuver took less than 2 minutes. We left Brenda standing alone in the middle of the road, her mouth agape, her live stream capturing nothing but her own stunning public humiliation. As Gus and I rolled away, the triumphant sound of his truck horn was the sweetest music I had ever heard. The 15-minute drive to the airfield was a blur of adrenaline, and the combined scent of wet dog and jet fuel. The wind was a physical force now, rocking Gus's massive truck. When we pulled up to Hangar 4, Maria was waiting for us, her arms crossed, a wry smile on her face as she looked from the truck to the sky. And there she was, the flying babushka. She was even bigger and uglier than I remembered, a fat, green 4-engine tube of pure utilitarian design. She looked less like a plane and more like a military barracks that had sprouted wings as a dare. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" I said to Gus, who was just staring, slack-jawed. "If you say so, Alex," he muttered. "Looks like a pregnant iguana." Maria had already arranged for a conveyor belt, the kind they use to load baggage onto commercial jets. My neighbors, who had followed the truck in a caravan of cars, looked at the plane with a mixture of awe and terror. "This is the next phase, people," I shouted over the wind. "We're a well-oiled machine. Let's load the cargo." What followed was one of the most surreal scenes of my life. A conveyor belt, normally used for suitcases, was now carrying a steady stream of pet carriers up into the cavernous, dark maw of the Antonov's cargo bay. "I've loaded a lot of weird things in my day, Alex," Gus yelled as he placed a crate containing two very angry-looking Siamese cats onto the belt. "Machine parts, frozen fish, a whole damn carnival ride once, but this takes the cake." "Just treat them like fragile cargo that complains a lot," I yelled back, climbing into the hold to direct traffic. "Secure the Chihuahuas. They're a flight risk. Make sure the geckos are away from the main exhaust manifold." Inside, it was organized chaos. I was strapping crates to the floor rings, using my old muscle memory to tie knots that wouldn't slip. The combined noise was unbelievable. A symphony of fear and confusion from a dozen different species. Once the last crate was secured, I did a final walkthrough. Every animal was as safe and stable as I could make them. I gave Gus a firm handshake. "You're a legend, man. Get out of here. Go save that patio furniture." He just grinned. "Godspeed, you crazy bastard." I sealed the cargo door and made my way to the cockpit. Sliding into the pilot's seat felt like coming home. The smell of old leather and hydraulic fluid, the dizzying array of dials and switches, it was all comfortingly familiar. I went through the pre-flight checklist, my hands moving with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. I fired up the 4 massive Ivchenko turboprop engines, one by one. They coughed to life with a plume of black smoke and a roar that vibrated through my entire body. The flying babushka was awake. I put on my headset. "Oakhaven Tower, this is Babushka 1, ready for taxi." A familiar voice crackled back. It was Rick, the head air traffic controller. "Babushka 1, you're cleared to taxi to runway 29er. The whole tower is watching this, Alex. We're all placing bets." "Just tell them to put their money on the plane full of cats, Rick," I said, easing the lumbering beast onto the taxiway. The wind was vicious, a stiff crosswind that wanted to push us off the runway. This was going to be tricky. As I lined up, I took one last look back towards the direction of Paradise Palms. I imagined Brenda standing alone on a ruined lawn, her clipboard rendered utterly useless. I let out a sharp, barking laugh. "Oakhaven Tower, Babushka 1, ready for takeoff." "Babushka 1, Rick's voice came back, steady and professional. "You are cleared for takeoff on runway 29er. Wind is 260 at 40 knots, gusting to 50. Godspeed." "Cleared for takeoff, Babushka 1. I pushed the throttles forward. The 4 engines screamed in protest, then roared in unison. The plane surged forward, a lumbering, overweight giant fighting for every inch of speed. The runway markers blurred past. The crosswind shoved us hard to the left, and I corrected with the rudder pedals, my leg muscles straining. 80 knots, I called out to the empty co-pilot seat. 100 V1, rotate. I pulled back on the yoke. The nose lifted. For a heart-stopping second, the plane felt like it was going to refuse, like it was too old and too heavy and too full of terrified animals to fly. But then, with a final, shuddering groan, the wheels left the pavement. We were airborne. The flying babushka climbed steeply into the angry gray sky, a ridiculous modern-day Noah's Ark, banking south towards the clearer skies inland. The flight to Ocala was bumpy, loud, and smelled faintly of wet fur and panic. But the old plane handled the turbulence like a champ. And an hour later, I was on final approach to Ocala International, a world away from the storm. The landing wasn't my smoothest. It was more of a controlled collision with the runway, but we were down and safe. As I taxied towards the private aviation terminal, I saw them. A welcome committee. A group of about 50 volunteers from the local animal shelter, alerted by Maria, were waiting on the tarmac. When I killed the engines and the propeller blades spun to a stop, they erupted in cheers. The moment the cargo bay door opened, revealing the wall of crates, a wave of ahs went through the crowd. They swarmed the plane with practiced efficiency, carefully unloading each carrier, cooing to the animals, offering water and soft blankets. I stood by the wing, watching the organized mercy, feeling a profound sense of exhaustion and satisfaction. A young volunteer with a tablet came up to me, a bright smile on her face. "Are you Alex?" she asked. "We've got Mrs. Higgins on a video call for you." She held up the tablet. Mrs. Higgins's tear-streaked, joyous face filled the screen. In the background, I could see another volunteer holding mittens, who was contentedly licking food from a bowl. "Alex, you angel!" she cried. "You saved my baby. You saved all our babies. You're a hero." "Just a guy with a pilot's license and a low opinion of HOAs, Mrs. Higgins," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Glad you're both safe." Her tearful thanks were all the payment I needed. 3 days later, I returned to Paradise Palms. The hurricane, in a final act of meteorological caprice, had veered east at the last minute. Our neighborhood was spared the worst of it. Just some downed palm fronds, overturned garbage cans, and a general air of dampness. But the community itself was transformed. The story of Operation Pet Lift had gone supernova. Brenda's live stream had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. It had been screen-recorded, shared, and memed into oblivion. She was an internet villain, a viral sensation nicknamed Hurricane Karen and the Bylaw Banshee. The gif of the flatbed truck driving over the lawns while she stood, impotent and shrieking, was already a classic. The HOA board, facing a full-scale digital mutiny, had held an emergency Zoom meeting. Brenda was unceremoniously stripped of her presidency and all her committee positions. She was facing a massive civil lawsuit from a coalition of residents for reckless endangerment, and Mr. Henderson and the other neighbor were suing her personally for the approved destruction of their lawns, claiming they had only given permission under extreme emotional duress. It was a legal masterpiece of petty revenge. The day after I got back, Officer Miller's squad car pulled up in front of my house. He got out, not with a ticket book, but with a slow, deliberate stride. "Just wanted to get an official statement for the record," he said, his face impassive, "about the unauthorized lawn aeration project." I opened my mouth to speak, but he held up a hand. "Off the record?" he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. He looked at my house, then at the sky, then back at me. "That was the best damn piece of community policing I've seen in my entire career." He brought his hands together in a single, slow, respectful clap. "Don't ever do it again." He tipped his hat, got back in his car, and drove away. That evening, I was sitting in a lawn chair in my backyard, a cold beer in my hand, watching Barnaby fail spectacularly to catch a lizard. The world was quiet again. A new kind of quiet. A peaceful quiet. Gus's truck rumbled to a stop out front, and a minute later he appeared through the side gate, holding a beer of his own. He handed me a folded piece of paper. It was his invoice. "Here's the bill," he said. "Triple emergency rate plus a 50% that was awesome surcharge." I laughed and took it without even looking at the total. "It's worth every penny, my friend." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the Florida sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The neighborhood felt different, calmer. The oppressive pall of Brenda's rain had lifted. We were just neighbors again. "So," Gus said, taking a long pull from his bottle, "what's the plan for the next natural disaster? Airlifting llamas out of a petting zoo? Ferrying penguins to Canada?" "Nah," I said, leaning my head back and closing my eyes. "I think I'm done. I'm officially re-retired. My days of high-stakes, high-altitude animal transport are over." I took a sip of my beer and opened one eye, giving him a sideways glance. "But, you know, if you ever need a getaway driver for a really, really big getaway..." I smiled. "I know a guy with a plane." He clinked his bottle against mine. In the yard, Barnaby, having finally given up on the lizard, trotted over and laid his big, dumb, wonderful head on my lap. Everything was right with the world.